Welcome to another episode of I Speak African. I'm your host Yanu. In today's episode, we will be discussing employment and working throughout the diaspora. Now, I'm going to focus more on America because I live in America, but I'm going to talk about other countries too. Unlike some, Western European countries like France and Germany and the Scandinavian countries, the U.S. doesn't really care about their employees. Actually, they work their employees like animals, like dogs. And burnout it's a very real problem in America. It's very prevalent right now in the United States. That's why everyone is looking for therapists and everyone calls out from work and looks for self-care days. Most Americans still work a 9 to 5. We work a 40-hour work week. Unlike, I know France has a 36. I think Germany does too. Also, America's unemployment is high, but then when you lose your job, the unemployment compensation you get or benefits is very low. So keep that in mind. It's not just about burnout; it's also about racism, prejudice, and discrimination. Other types of discrimination. There's a lot of micromanaging in America, and I'm going to talk about this one job I had when I was pretty fresh out of undergrad. So it was like my first corporate job. I was really happy, but they weren't paying me a lot at all. I was only getting paid $16. So I was working at this rich investment firm. It wasn't like a huge investment firm. Its main branch was in Baltimore, and then they had like a second branch in DC. So I was working at the DC branch. The DC branch. And my supervisor was this Mzungu girl named, I think her name was Karen or Lord or something like that. Anyway, I remember one time she went on a vacation and I had to assume her role as like the administrative assistant for our boss, who was the CPA. And one time he was like, "Okay, Yanu, can you organize my binder for this client?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." So I organized it. I start organizing the binder, and before I finish, he leaves. He's like, "I'm going to step out." I'm like, "All right." So before he comes back, I'm done with the binder. I put the binder in his top drawer. This guy comes back, and I'm like, "I'm done. I put the binder in your top drawer." And he's like, "All right." He starts doing some other stuff. And then he takes the binder out without actually thinking. And then he places it somewhere, and he puts papers over the binder. And then he's like screaming, "Yanu." I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Where's my binder?" I'm like, "I put it in your top drawer." He's like, "Well, I can't find it." I'm like, "Well, I don't know what to tell you. I put it in your top drawer." And he's like, "Call Karen." So I call Karen. He's like, "Ask her." I'm thinking she's not even here. She's on vacation. So I call her anyway. She's like, "I don't know." And then he's like all flustered and annoyed and stuff. And then after 10 minutes, he's like, "Hey, I found the binder." And he was like, "Yeah, I found the binder." I'm like, "Okay, no sorry, no, I apologize, my bad, my mistake." Nope, he just act like it never happened. And that's very, very common in corporate America, very common. So then a couple days later, we were having this party at one of the top investors, CPA's house or whatever. And actually before that, let me tell you all that at this firm that I was working at, it was probably about 100 people working there, or maybe somewhere between 75 and 100 people. Within this branch alone in DC, there were only 4 black people. There was me, there was this black intern girl, there was the IT guy, and then there was this black woman she was probably about 10 years older than me, who was this white guy's personal assistant. And I remember one time the IT guy was like, "Hey, it's good to see another black person here." And I was like, "Yeah, thank you." And he was like, "Yeah, go talk to the managing director. He's down." And I was like, "What you mean?" And he was like, "Yeah, his daughter-in-law is black." And I was like, "Okay." And then I'm thinking to myself, just because his daughter-in-law is black doesn't mean that he's down with black people. It just means his son met a black girl that he fell in love with, and that's who he wanted to marry. But if he was so down with black people, there wouldn't be only 4 black people working in this whole entire firm. So I mean, I met the managing director. It turns out me and him went to the same undergrad institution, and I remember when I came out, like these these lower level investors was like, "Oh, you went to go talk to the big guy?" And I was like, "Yeah." And like, "Wow, you have some balls." And I was like, "All right, whatever." But back to what I was saying about this story. So we had this party, and it was like this one, like really big investor. It was actually his firm, the firm that I was working at. It merged with his firm, so it took a lot of his clients, and he got to stay on as like one of the top managing partners. So anyway, we go to his house, and his house is in a very rich part of Maryland. It's called Chevy Chase. So if you live in Maryland, you live in Virginia, you live in DC, you know how rich Chevy Chase is. So we go to Chevy Chase, and we're driving, and it's the suburbs of Chevy Chase. We're driving, and we pull up this like big hill, and then as we're driving up, we see this big house that looks very much like a plantation house. So then we all get out, and it's my boss, the one that was like, he couldn't find the binder. He drives me, and then we get out, and then the guy who owns the house is telling us the story of the house, about the history of the house, and that it's a historical property, meaning that you can't alter it in any way because it's historical. And he's telling us that he's the second owner of this house. So then I'm looking around, I see a lot of things that rub me the wrong way. So then he's like, "All right, let's go down to the basement, to the wine cellar." He shows us all his wine, collection of wine, and how he ages it and all that stuff. And then he takes us into the yard, and he's like, "This thing right here is where they used to store ice back in the day." And it's like this huge pit. And if you've seen Django Unchained, it's very reminiscent, very similar to that pit they would throw Kerry Washington's character, Brunhilde. And I think they also threw Jamie Foxx in that pit too. And me and the black girl that's the intern, we're looking at each other and we're like, "Yeah, that's not for ice. We know what that was for." But anyway, so then we go into the house and we're drinking, and these white women who I work with, who barely speak to me, like, "Oh, Yanu, you're here." I'm like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Oh, they're talking to me. They're like, "Oh, you went to school?" I'm like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Wow, you went to a good school." I'm like, "Uh-huh." And then they're like, "Oh, wow, you're so well spoken." And I'm like, "Yep." And then, so after this party, it's the weekend. I think that party took place on a Friday. So then I come back to work, and Karen's back. And Karen's like, "Yanu, you do good work here. Do you like the job?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Do you want to stay on?" I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Okay." A week later, I found out that the position that she was talking to me about was given to another guy. And I'm thinking, like, why did you ask me in the first place? Well, that's how the workplace is. A lot of times you'll have a job, and if it's on contract or it's temporary, whatever, they'll be like, "Oh, do you want the job?" And you'll be like, "Yeah, I want the job." And they won't give it to you. It's happened to me many times. And I remember my next job, I was working at this NGO. It's a big NGO in DC. I was working at this NGO, and the NGO is comprised of, like, the top people are economists. So very similar to a law firm or a hospital, the top employees are doctors at a hospital, lawyers at a law firm. So we were working, and my boss brought in this legal advisor. And this legal advisor, she often felt inconfident because of the fact that the economists at the job I was working at don't listen to the input of other people. They only listen to economists. So we have a weekly meeting. So we're having this weekly meeting, and all the economists are giving their 2 cents. And then this legal advisor tries to give hers, and they just shut her down. All her ideas, all her proposals, they just shut it down. And they're pretty much like, "Yeah, we don't care." So she's mad and she's frustrated. So what do people do when they're mad and frustrated? They take it out on the black person. So she's like, "Yanu." I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, organize these files for me. And I'm like, sure. So she gives me the files. I go to organize them. And then I finish. And then I'm like, hey, I finished organizing the files. She goes and looks, and she's like upset. And this doesn't make sense because you don't get upset over a small mistake like this, which it wasn't my fault. I'm going to explain. So she's like, Yanu. I'm like, yeah. And then she's like, what is this? I'm like, what is what? I'm like, I organized as you said. And she's like, yeah, but this one file, it's falling down. I'm like, yeah, because there's nothing to hold it up. So I'm not going to place it outside of the filing cabinet so somebody can accidentally take it or it can be misplaced. And she's like, no, this is unacceptable. This work you're doing is very, reminiscent of the behavior of a 3-year-old. Even a 3-year-old can do a better job than this. And she's like pointing to her head, like, what's it called? The father. And if you watch the cartoon or the graphic novel Invincible, and he's like telling Mark to think. She's like doing that to me. And she's like, you use your brain. Like, you don't have a brain. Like, can't you use a brain? So I get upset. And I don't say anything to her. I'm like, all right. I tell my boss. My boss likes me because she likes me because I speak her language. Like, the same language that she speaks from her native country, I speak it. So she likes me, and also she likes the fact that I'm a hard worker. So I was like, this woman, the legal advisor, told me I was stupid, and I explained the whole entire story to her, and she's like, yeah, that's not right. I'm going to make her apologize to you. So the legal advisor ended up apologizing to me. But, the sad thing is that you don't always have a boss who's going to look out for you. In most jobs, the bosses will be like, yeah, I don't care, whatever. And that's why I really implore people who are trying to find out what they want to do in life, like, really think about it. Don't just go to college, because as you can see, I went to college and they were only paying me $16 an hour. There are many alternatives. You can be an electrician, you can be a plumber, you can do HVAC, and those make a lot of money. Those make 6 figures. Because I used to work at Lowe's, and if you don't know what Lowe's is a home. It's a hardware like depot store where you can buy stuff to build your home, and also just to build things in general. And when I was working there, a lot of people would come in that were electricians, and I would just speak to them, and they were like, hey, if you want to be an apprentice, let me know. So it's actually very easy to be an apprentice, whether it's plumbing, electrician, or HVAC. And then when you're done with your apprenticeship, you can go on and work, and you can make over 6 figures. And then you can even start your own business. So that's something that people should look into instead of going to college. I mean, unless if you do want to go to college, I'm not saying don't go, but if you do go to college, make sure the major you study is something that can be applicable to the society that we live in. So like, if you want to go to college, it makes sense that you're pursuing college so you can be a medical doctor or a lawyer, because you actually have to go to university to be a lawyer or a medical doctor or a CPA or an engineer. So when it comes to jobs like that, yeah, of course, go to college. But if you're just going to study like sociology or anthropology or something, computer science that won't necessarily get you a job, I would say save that money and do electrician or plumbing or HVAC. Yeah, but that's what happened at that job. And then now I'll switch gears a little bit to Jamaica. As people know, Jamaica is very big on tourism, hospitality, like hotels and the beach and everything. So that's one of their like big money-making industries. So I found this out a couple of years ago. There was a law known as the Beach Control Act of 1956, and it was placed until Jamaica got its independence in 1962. But because that law was intact for so long, a lot of foreign people or a lot of companies bought up the beaches of Jamaica, making it inaccessible to the native Jamaicans. Like, black people who live in Jamaica, who are indigenous to Jamaica, can't even go on the beaches to, to fish, to sell things, and it's crazy. And for example, there's a place in Jamaica called Stairtown, where a company like bought all this land, and then they built a huge cement wall to block off the Jamaicans from entering. And I remember, like I said in my past videos, I think it was episode 2 or 3, I spoke about the treatment of African women who go over to the Middle East. Like, I've seen documentaries of like Kenyan women, Ugandan women, Tanzanian, Nigerian, and Ghanaian women going over there and the way they're being treated. And the reason why I bring this up in this topic, not only is it because it's relevant, but it's also very important for those of us who have loved ones and family members who are contemplating going over there, to tell them not to go over there, because it's not worth it. It really isn't. Like, it's a huge risk, and a lot of people always think it's not going to be me. It's not going to be me, and then it happens to you. And sometimes, that's it. That's the end. It happens. But the sad thing is, like, our leaders don't even try to get us back when things like this happen. Like, they know the women over there are being mistreated and being treated like animals, or worse than animals, and they don't do anything. Like, they don't do anything to make the economy better, or try to make the industries better for us, so that our women don't have to leave our countries. Like, I know, like, in Kenya, most people make about, probably even less than this, like 30,000 Kenyan shillings per month. And like, that's equivalent to, like, I think $200 American, or a little bit more than 200 American. That's nothing. Like, you can't live on that for a month. Like, try living on 240 American dollars a month. That's not, you can't do that. And I remember, on my last job, I was talking to 2 of my colleagues. One's a Kenyan guy, and the other was a Ugandan girl. And we're talking in the break room, just the 3 of us, and we're talking about how racist and passive-aggressive non-black people are at our jobs. And the Ugandan girl was telling us how she even stopped braiding her hair because they were saying it was unprofessional. And I was like, that's crazy. And it's like, we have the Crown Act, which is supposed to protect black people from discrimination due to how mostly our women, but also men, choose to style their hair. Like, because a lot of black kids have been denied graduation or kicked out of school because they have dreadlocks, and a lot of women have lost their jobs because men and women have lost their jobs because they have dreadlocks. But the Crown Act should be federal, but it's only law in 24 states, and I don't think it's working like that. But yeah, I remember when I was a freshman in college, I was working at Target, and this is another thing that people need to understand, is that companies, they are master manipulators. They'll try to make you feel important. They'll tell you what you want to hear so you can do work for them, and so they can make money off of you. And then at the end of the day, they'll fire you, or they'll suspend you, or whatever they want. They won't give you a pay raise. They'll be like, oh no, we can't do that right now. I remember when I was in college working at Target, and that was like one of my first jobs after graduating from high school. And I remember when they were short, they would call me up and they were like, hey, Yanu, can you come in? And this is my day off. And they were like, yeah, we really need you. Like, it would be such a huge help if you could come in. And me being, a young teenager, I would be like, yeah, I'll come in. And I would get dressed and rush to work. And they didn't give me any kind of monetary incentive. They were just like, oh yeah, you can get a drink on us at Starbucks. And now that I'm older, I remember my last job, when they would call me, like, when somebody would call out, or we were short staffed, and they would call me, I just wouldn't pick up my phone. I just let it go to voicemail, because you're not obligated to answer them. You don't have to. And that's, it's very important to maintain your mental health. You don't have to come in, and also your physical health. A lot of times when you get hurt on a job, you think these jobs scare that you get hurt? No. They'll give you some small workers' comp, and then you have to do so much just to get workers' comp. So always put yourself first, and then because a job will fire you without a second thought. They really will. And also, like, for example, like I was saying earlier, most jobs in America are like a 40-hour work week. Some jobs have 36 hours. I know it's very kind of big on the West Coast, like California. But most jobs in America are still 40 hours. But, you know, they need to be more, America needs to be more like France in the sense that France has a 36-hour work week and their retirement age is 62. And I don't know if you guys keep up with, you know, French politics, but when earlier this year, they were trying to push the retirement age to 64 in France. Now, first it was 65, and then they said 64, and the French were going crazy because they were like, no, we're going to retire at 62, and you're not going to change that. And I don't know I haven't followed up with it, but I think it remained at 62. I'm not sure. But yeah, that concludes another episode of my podcast, I Speak African. I'm your host, Yanu, and thank you for joining me. And remember to like and subscribe to my page so I can give you all more content. And leave your thoughts in comments. Leave your thoughts in the comments. You guys can email me at ispeakafrican12@gmail.com and also listen to these episodes on Spotify. Have a blessed day.